It's about the view. It's like, it's become like a medical hospital that displays human misfailure. Like, it's like here, let's look at this political oddity. It's like, it really is like the left-wing equivalent of a carnival sideshow, except instead of bearded ladies and fat clowns and two-headed cows. Well, let me rephrase that. But The View is a victim of the sunk cost fallacy. How can you now speak the truth when for years you've been telling lie after lie after lie? Now you're carrying this big bag of rocks around you because it's too harmful for their ego to admit that we really were dishonest. And they could be honest. All they would have to say is, look, we hate Trump so much. We were willing to lie about Joe Biden because we felt he was preferable. We thought our lying and our cover-up was on your behalf. Just say that. You're still scum, but at least you're an honest scum.
Whoopi Goldberg just learned that sarcasm is like a boomerang, and when it's thrown carelessly, it doesn't just come back. It comes back with velocity. And this time, it smacked her square in the ego. On the surface, it looked like another day at The View. Whoopi perched high in her daytime pulpit, issuing thunderous declarations with the conviction of someone who believes their opinion is immune to scrutiny, wrapped in applause, and lovingly spoon-fed to a clapping studio audience. But then Greg Gutfeld and Timpf stepped onto the scene, and everything changed. They didn't yell. They didn't rage. They didn't even raise their voices. Instead, they wielded their trademark blend of deadpan humor and forensic precision, dissecting Whoopi's statements with the detached elegance of cultural pathologists performing an ideological autopsy. What was supposed to be a triumphant takedown of conservative dissent turned into a cautionary tale about what happens when performative outrage meets actual argument. Whoopi wasn't just challenged. She was exposed. And not with cruelty, but with clarity. The sort that makes viewers lean forward and think, wait, are we finally peeling back the curtain on this whole charade?
Wednesday, everyone. Well, not if you're Whoopi Goldberg. A.K.A. Karen Johnson. Yeah, who knew Whoopi was a Karen? I thought that was only for white people, like Toyota Priuses and...
There's a strange alchemy at work on The View, where emotion is marketed as insight, and every interruption is framed as passion. For years, Whoopi Goldberg has thrived in that environment, a place where rhetorical volume substitutes for veracity, and dissent is filtered through applause cues and studio lighting. She's been the wise elder, the firebrand, the occasional comic relief. But above all, she's been untouchable, protected by the double armor of celebrity reverence and ideological insulation. But what happens when that armor gets punctured? What happens when someone doesn't play along with the reverence act? Enter Greg Gutfeld, whose specialty is not just puncturing egos, but deflating entire brands of cultural sanctimony. Whoopi expected deference. What she got was dissection. Gutfeld didn't just disagree with her. He dismantled her. Quietly. Methodically. With all the flair of a surgeon peeling back layers of a performance that had grown far too comfortable in its own contradictions. This wasn't just a clapback. It was an unraveling.
It's so cute when one of their side gets punished. They sulk like they ran out of raw cookie dough in the green room. Yeah, ABC suspended Whoopi for 2 weeks because she said the Holocaust had nothing to do with race. She said this on a show called The View, which makes everything about race. Except
the pedestal cracked. The performance crumbled. And the fallout? Televised, time-stamped, and immortalized in 4K for the internet's eternal archive. Whoopi Goldberg, the untouchable doyenne of The View, finally met a force she couldn't dismiss with a smirk or shout down with a monologue. The unraveling wasn't dramatic. It was methodical. No shouting. No theatrics. Just two voices, Gutfeld and Timpf, calmly peeling away the illusion that Whoopi's hot takes are anything more than rebranded elitist grievance. Tea was a slow burn. Gutfeld began the fire, pointing out the ideological hypocrisy of someone who champions tolerance 1 minute and demands censorship the next. Whoopi tried to pivot, to reclaim the floor, to reassert control with her usual blend of mock indignation and moral grandstanding. But this time, the audience didn't lean in. They recoiled. Because once you see the strings, the puppet show stops being magic. And once the pedestal collapses, well, the fall feels long, and the landing very, very public.
Kat, did you ever see such a group? It's amazing how Joy and Whoopi became the smart ones.
For me, the most shocking thing about the conversation was how truly boring it was. They're like, well, the cicadas, they're cicadas. Okay, but it was like every 100 years. No, it's every 17 years. Do you know how many Emmys this show has? 31.
31 Emmys?
This show has 31. I mean, I'd hate to see the conversations that don't make headlines. What?
And we don't have a single
Not a
Emmy.
single
You don't
one.
Have what does that tell you about the Emmys, Kat? Yes, thank you, Mr. Boo.
And then came Kat Timpf, smiling, sarcastic, and absolutely unbothered by the theatrics unfurling across the stage. If Gutfeld cracked the foundation, Timpf casually walked in and started flicking the ceiling tiles off with a toothpick. Her strength lies not in shouting louder, but in making her opponent's volume seem absurd. While Whoopi fumed and flailed, Kat sat like a librarian at a slam poetry contest, unimpressed, unamused, and absolutely surgical in her wit. She wasn't angry, she was entertained. And that made it worse for Whoopi. Timpf calmly pointed out the glaring irony, a multimillionaire Hollywood icon lecturing the country about oppression from her cushy chair in Manhattan, flanked by fellow elites, sipping coffee and nodding solemnly after every moral soundbite. There was no rage in Timpf's tone, just amusement. And that, more than anything, cut through the noise. Because satire only works when the subject is absurd. And Whoopi, in that moment, was offering up absurdity on a silver platter.
No, it's not about race.
It's about a different race.
But it's not about race. It's not about race.
What is it about?
Because it's about man's inhumanity to man.
Yeah, that's heroically stupid. Even for The View. What did she think Hitler meant when he said master race? The 100-meter dash at the Berlin Olympics? So for the first time in The View's history, it's not about race. Just some whites exterminating 6 million other whites. So what's the big deal?
Gutfeld and Timpf didn't storm the gates. They knocked gently, walked in, and flipped the furniture over. The brilliance of their takedown was its simplicity. They didn't try to outshout Whoopi. They let her shout herself into incoherence. They didn't stoop to personal attacks. They elevated the conversation and let her responses reveal the gap between her persona and her principles. This wasn't a debate. It was a deconstruction. Every attempt Whoopi made to reassert control only deepened the hole. She contradicted herself, backpedaled, reached for moral arguments that had long since expired in the public imagination. And meanwhile, Gutfeld just smirked, arms crossed, watching the contradictions pile up like receipts. Timpf added the punchlines, punctuating the absurdity with the finesse of someone who knows exactly how fragile media performances are, and how easily they collapse under a single well-placed joke.
I hit myself in the face so I can feel something. You know, it's like so boring. He's like, yeah, I like Instacart, but don't worry, I tip the poors. But, you know, Joy, you actually don't like Instacart, and you do like the store. And then Joy is like, yeah, I do. I like to go to the store. I like to walk around and see what's at the store, what I do want, what I don't want. Maybe I want tuna fish, and I just want to hit myself.
But the real punch? It came from the viewers, not the hosts. Because this wasn't just a moment. It was a revelation. Suddenly, Twitter was ablaze. TikTok flooded with clips. Comment sections turned into digital town halls. Everyone who had quietly suspected that The View was less a panel and more a performance was finally vindicated. The applause, once a weapon, started to sound like a laugh track. The set, once regal, now looked like the backdrop to a sitcom that didn't know it had been cancelled in the court of public opinion. For the first time, people weren't laughing with The View, they were laughing at it. And Whoopi, caught in the center, wasn't just mocked, she was unveiled. The show couldn't shield her. The format couldn't protect her. The illusion had cracked. And all it took was two commentators and a moment of truth too sharp to ignore.
Ah, you look tantalizing. You know, I make fun of The View a lot, but that's only because they keep talking. Because COVID also taught Sunny Hostin how to get her groceries delivered.
3 years, that's when I discovered Instacart. And I give them a big tip because they don't always pay their people well. And it's so that's been an issue, I think, for the company. But man, you can get toiletries, you can get fire logs.
Fire logs? She had to tell the audience that she tips big because even she knows she sounds insane.
Kat Timpf wasn't there to argue. She was there to observe, the way a zoologist studies the wild antics of a creature who thinks it's the center of the ecosystem. And in this particular ecosystem, Whoopi Goldberg had long mistaken dominance for depth. But Timpf didn't flinch. She simply leaned back, smirked, and began what can only be described as a masterclass in effortless exposure. She didn't shout. She didn't plead. She just pointed out the blindingly obvious contradiction, that Whoopi, a woman who claims to be a voice for the voiceless, somehow never stops talking long enough to listen. Timpf's commentary wasn't cruel, it was clinical. It revealed the ridiculousness of a media personality who rails against elitism from behind a table worth more than most viewers' annual salaries. She dissected the disconnect between Whoopi's supposed outsider voice and her insider reality. A Hollywood legend lecturing Americans on struggle, flanked by co-hosts who spend more time in makeup chairs than most people spend with their children. The performance collapsed under the weight of its own pretense, and Timpf didn't need to twist the knife. She simply held up the mirror.
Kat, how many co-hosts has The View had since it first started? I've lost count. I don't know any of these people.
No, that's because they don't stick around long enough. There have been 17 since 1997. That's a lot. That's because they're women.
Oh, really?
They're hormones. They're changing their minds. I don't want to work here. Yes, I do. That's why women are always changing jobs every day.
Wow,
I just quit.
Direct mail to Catherine Timpf. Not me. I disavow everything she just said.
Together, Gutfeld and Timpf didn't just push back, they revealed. They didn't attack Whoopi the person. They dismantled Whoopi the persona. And the distinction mattered. Because this wasn't about character assassination. This was about cultural accountability. It was about showing, in real time, how daytime television had become a safe haven for unexamined hypocrisy. A place where slogans replace thought, and emotional outbursts masquerade as moral clarity. Gutfeld questioned the logic. Timpf questioned the performance. And what was left when the applause faded, the lighting dimmed, and the echo chamber cracked? A woman who looked stunned. Not defeated, just disoriented. Like someone waking up mid-monologue to realize the audience is no longer applauding, but watching. Watching her. Watching the formula break down. Watching the castle built on condescension finally lose its foundation. And in that silence, something remarkable happened. The audience saw through it. Saw the scaffolding. Saw the contradictions. And suddenly, The View wasn't a fortress of feminist intellect. It was a floundering improv sketch with a host who forgot her lines.
Brains are small. But who's the dumbest one of all? True, none of them are in Mensa, but who's the most densa? Perhaps it's Sonny who mastered the art of making idiots look smart. Now The View could ask a mirror who's the dumbest one of all, but there's no way that glass doesn't shine.
And that silence, that was the moment. Not the shouting. Not the faux outrage. Not even the awkward segue into commercial. The real showstopper was the vacuum left when Whoopi had nothing left to say. Because for someone who makes a living reacting, the absence of reaction is an indictment all its own. It wasn't that she was speechless. It was that she was exposed. And not in the gotcha sense, but in the raw, undeniable intellectual nakedness of being stripped of your talking points and realizing you've forgotten how to think without them. The look in her eyes said it all, a flash of recognition that maybe, just maybe, her platform wasn't made of truth and bravery, but applause and inertia. It was like watching a stage actor forget the script mid-performance and realize, for the first time, that the audience isn't impressed. They're curious. Curious about what happens when the lights dim and the mask falls. Curious about what's left behind when the performance ends and the person is revealed. And in that moment, Gutfeld and Timpf didn't need a mic drop. They'd already left the stage. The silence spoke louder than anything either of them could say.
I was so shocked that she answered that way. That she said there's nothing she'd do differently. And then in case there's any questions for her to say, by the way, I was involved in all of it.
Yeah.
But then you're running as the opposition. That would have been so easy to just say, there's so much I could change and I can't wait to change. It's not like they're going to ask you, what would you do?
Yeah.
You know, it's not like you're actually going to be pressed on specifics in that interview. I mean, the way that Whoopi was looking at her.
Yeah. Oh, man. That was sexual.
That was very Hallmark Christmas Channel.
Yes.
Then Kat Timpf, with the timing of a sniper and the tone of a mildly annoyed librarian, delivered the final blow. Not with venom, not with rage, but with that trademark Timpf deadpan that feels less like an attack and more like an inevitable truth rolling downhill. She looked around at the set, at the overproduced outrage, the synchronized clapping, the self-congratulatory nods, and with a raised eyebrow and one perfectly timed remark, she turned the whole thing into farce. "If this is what being silenced looks like," she said, "I'd love to be oppressed on national television 5 days a week with a latte and a stylist." And just like that, the air left the room. The myth cracked. Because Whoopi's brand of oppression isn't recognizable to the average American. It's designer oppression, curated suffering, repackaged into digestible daytime drama for a demographic that thinks a disagreement is trauma and being fact-checked is persecution. Timpf turned that myth to dust with a single sentence. And in doing so, she proved that sometimes the truth doesn't need to be shouted. It just needs to be spoken plainly.
Sausage maker Johnsonville is recalling more than 42,000 pounds of pork sausage for possible contamination with plastic fibers. Fortunately, authorities were able to track all 42,000 pounds to a single location in New York City. But thanks to liberal privilege, Whoopi hangs on, which is fine since she apologized. But not before digging an even deeper hole than the one in her head.
And now, we arrive at the twist, the real kicker. It wasn't just that Whoopi lost the exchange. It was that everyone knew it. Not in a scandalous way. Not with hashtags or tabloid fallout. But with a quiet, collective realization. The moment the performance faltered, the audience stopped buying it. The emperor wasn't naked. The emperor was exhausted. Exhausted by the routine. Exhausted by the contradictions. Exhausted by the realization that moral authority can't be sustained by applause alone. Greg Gutfeld and Kat Timpf didn't destroy anything. They didn't need to. They simply pointed to the hollow space where authenticity should have been and let the viewers fill in the rest. And when people finally looked, really looked, they didn't see a thought leader. They saw a celebrity clinging to relevance in a shrinking spotlight, confusing volume for virtue and theatrics for truth. What we witnessed wasn't a takedown. It was an unmasking. A quiet, devastating unmasking of everything The View pretends to be, and everything Whoopi Goldberg hopes people still believe she is. And the scariest part for her? Once the mask slips, you can't put it back on. Not convincingly. Not completely. Not after people have seen what's underneath.